Hello to all viewers. My name is David Williams. I'm currently the Secretary of the United Federation of Phoenix, the Phoenix, Arizona Star Trek and General Science Fiction fan club that just recently celebrated its 50th anniversary. And as part of our club's post anniversary celebrations, we want to record an oral history of the club. And so we are contacting some of the members of the club from the earliest times the club existed and asking them to record their memories of how they got involved with it. And so today it's my pleasure to introduce Mea Brink. Yes, thank you.
No
Um,
problem.
when did you become a Star Trek fan?
Well, back in the day, families only had one television, and we had one in our living room. And so we tended to watch what my mom and dad liked. And my dad loved Star Trek. And so I grew up, in the late 60s when I was 7 or 8. I was watching Star Trek with him, and I really liked it. So that was my first exposure was in 1966, 67, 68. Watching them weekly in the living room with most of my family in there, and some of my family going, "We want to watch Wagon Trail." And my dad always said, "No, no, we're watching Star Trek."
That's awesome. So you were one of the ones who actually saw it when it was originally broadcast on NBC in 66 through
Yes.
69. Cool.
Yes. And I gotta say the original order was a little confusing when they went back and the uniforms changed a lot in the beginning. And I remember us talking about that and not being cognizant of the fact that they of course um don't film in the same order that they show them.
Yeah, that can be confusing because the original pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before, which sold the series, was actually aired, I think, fifth, and then of course they updated the uniforms there when
Yes.
the series sold, and of course the first episode that was broadcast um, was the Man Trap, and with the Salt Vampire, and of course they had changed the uniforms, so I can see how that would be confusing. So here in Phoenix, Arizona, where the UFP formed, can you remember? Can you describe any of the initial conversations around forming the a fan club here, a Star Trek fan club in Phoenix, and any memories you have, or at least your involvement at that time?
I remember finding the flyer hanging up by our lockers at high school about them starting a Star Trek club and being really excited and waiting for my best friend Joy to come. And she came carrying a flyer and said, "Have you seen this?" And I'm like, "Yes, I saw that." And so we were very excited to go. I believe she went to the first meeting, and for some reason I couldn't go, so I made her come back and tell me all about it. And of course, the most exciting thing for us was that John Fong had a reel-to-reel and the videos on them. So we were like, we're going to get to watch Star Trek episodes. That was easily the biggest draw, was because by then it was in syndication, but you never knew what time things were going to come on. There was no DVRs. Uh, you just saw what you could see. We had been reading the books, though. The episodes came out in books, and we would read them. I think I was reading those in seventh and eighth grade, and then, but it took them a long time to get them all published. So we still retain book-like knowledge of some of those episodes because when you read a book, you see the name of the episode over and over again. So, and the characters and stuff, it doesn't go by as fast. So our trivia games were brutal. Um, but a lot of the first conversations, when you would step into the UFP at the beginning, there was just like 10 conversations going on. There was no nerds were not cool back then. And there was no such word as geek. And we were definitely geeks. We were into drama and Star Trek and sci-fi. And I don't think, I'm going to a high school where it's cheerleaders and jocks and then the stoners on the bridge at Central and between Central and Brophy. And it was just so nice to find a place where I felt like, oh yeah, these are my people. they want
Yeah.
to they want to do this. And Unfortunately, at the beginning, we spent an awful lot of time on business and organizing. It wasn't it wasn't very smooth with regard to organizing, and I think that probably the founders had different ideas of what it was going to look like. So there was a lot of back and forth at the beginning, and I remember just sitting there and thinking, I don't care how we're organized. Are we going to watch an episode? Um, and Joy too. And also, there was a lot of most of the people who were in the club didn't have homes, so finding a place where we could meet and show the reel to reel. A lot of apartments then were much smaller than they are now. And I also have memories of being crowded into a too small apartment and nobody caring. We were just gonna, we had a lot of discussions about really silly things like if we were going to have food and what kind of food we were going to have. And um, at some point, they introduced Robert's Rules of Order. And oh my gosh, there was a lot of fighting about Robert's Rules of Order and how they worked. So, as a 16-year-old, I had a very strong working knowledge of Robert's Rules of Order thanks to the UFP.
Awesome. Yeah, a couple of points that you mentioned there. James Blish did the novelization of the episodes of the original series, and those books were coming out throughout the 1970s. And those stories that he wrote in there were based on the original scripts and the first versions, and not necessarily the final versions of them. So you could see
Yes.
elements in those stories in the James Blish novels that were might have been scenes that weren't actually in the final episodes of the series. So I bet that was a source of interest.
On trivia, yes.
Yeah, yeah. But having trivia like that, I bet that was a lot of fun.
It was great.
So yeah, our research is that the first meeting of the UFP was actually on September 13th, 1975, which was the day that Space 1999 first premiered here in the United States, or at least here in the Phoenix market. And you had the meeting afterwards, but then, as you've described, how a lot of the early UFP meetings, yeah, people just wanted to get together and watch the episodes and do trivia. Were there any other activities or traditions or things that you guys did in those first year or two that you were involved?
Well, I can't remember when the first convention came, but the conventions were a very unifying factor. I want to say, I think the first one was in 1976.
Here in
Um,
Phoenix, you mean? A
yeah,
convention here
in
in Phoenix?
Phoenix.
Okay.
Yeah, they started in the early in the late 70s. They definitely started. And so suddenly we were thrown into a task. From the first convention that we went to, we were working it. We were not just we didn't just have a booth. We were helping to run the entire convention. So I do remember the people who were old enough to drive were going and picking up the celebrities for it. And I I remember at one point Tony Moore handing me like $200 and a list of liquor to go and buy. And Joy and I went, and we were like 16, and we went and bought all this liquor and brought it back for the green room. And it was a different time because I didn't think anything of it. And nobody at the store said anything. I just gave them the list and they got all the stuff and we did it. But none of us, I really don't think any of us had any experience at all with conventions. So we came to them with no expectations. And sometimes we did really, really fun things that I don't think you could do now. I know one particular year when Logan's Run had just come out. The convention then was like at the Adams Hotel and the Washington Hotel. And so at midnight, we met up at the top floor of the Adams Hotel and we broke up into runners and sandmen. And the runners got a 3-minute head start, and you had to get down to the bottom of the Adams Hotel, across the convention center, and up to the top floor of Washington Hotel to win. I that was so fun. And when I think about that, I'm thinking, wow, would I let my 15-year-old go and do that? I'm not sure that I would, but it was it was just an innocent time of everybody involved. And so the conventions were what we made them. They certainly were not put on by any kind of professional organization. And so the UFP had a big role from the very beginning. And it it helped us to get out of ourselves a little bit and realize. there's a bigger world out there. And when Star Wars came out, it brought in twice as many fans. I mean, the attendance at the cons just doubled overnight. And sometime around that time, the World Sci-Fi Convention was in Phoenix. And so that also then brought in a lot of sci-fi people who had not been at the ones that might have been sort of organized by Barry Bond or Bijou Trimble and her husband. So it was an ever expanding, and as a high schooler, it was really eye-opening to see, the bigger world around you, because you just don't realize, how many people and how many different kinds of people. And one of the things that I really valued about it was that a lot of those people had a good influence on me, and some of them had very bad influences on me. And it was like life lessons going, oh, I see. Yeah, people actually do this. Because when you're in high school, you know, you don't realize the value of people, and you don't realize how central it can be to have somebody in their 20s who's a role model for you. And they
Yeah.
definitely were. Although meeting them later in life, I have discovered they were all afraid of me. Um, so I was wild.
Well, we were all young and what at one time there and
Oh,
probably did
yes.
things like that there. But it's really interesting that point about because the first Star Trek convention I think was in New York City and Joan Winston and Jacqueline Lichtenberg and that there's a whole committee of folks that put on a couple of conventions in New York City. I think it was in 72 and 73. And then they started to expand to other major cities through the mid 70s. And it's really great to hear about you guys helping to put one of those nonprofit, purely fan-run conventions on here in Phoenix there in the late 1970s. Bijou and John Trimble being involved at that time. We brought them out here in 2017 as part of the UFP's 3-year celebration of the 50th anniversary of Star Trek, and I'm really glad that we did since John Trimble has passed away. Since then, Bijou is still
Mhm.
around. So those are really cool stories. As you continued on in the UFP, was there any particular activity or endeavor that you really enjoyed participating? I know that in that from like 1977-ish through maybe 89, the UFP seemed to be very heavily involved in making fanzines, fan-made collections of stories and artwork that were then sold. And that's something that a lot of Star Trek clubs around the country did in the so-called paper and stamps time, way before the internet. That's how they shared their fandom. Do you recall any things like that from that time?
Yes, and we were excited about there was two sisters, the Etling sisters, Peggy and something, and they would do songs. So they took common tunes or known tunes and wrote fan songs like "What Do You Do with a Drunken Vulcan," things like that. And we would always be waiting for the fanzine to come out to get the words all written out, because there were no copy machines. You either wrote them down when they were singing them, or you didn't have them. So fanzines, even outside of Star Trek, were like a printed thing. Nobody ever handed you anything like that except like dittos in school. So getting something like that I mean, we paid for them with our dues, and we were always very careful to show up at the meeting where they were handing them out, so we didn't have to pay the postage. Because when you're in high school, you don't want to be paying for anything extra out of your whatever little limited money that you have. But the fanzines they were a big production for the club. And I think the first few were actually on dittos and not mimeographed. And so dittos are really a lot of work, and then mimeographs are even more work than that. Just making that little mimeograph paper correct. If you make a single mistake, you got to throw away the whole sheet. And they were an effort of love to put together and to do. And growing up from Guggenheim and Tony Moore really were very welcoming of us younger people. And we got to be very good friends, especially with Greg. And he was the director of one of the local news stations, and he directed the news. And I remember being there when they read some part of the fanzine on the news as an ad for the convention. And I remember thinking that was so cool, and trying to get home from play practice to be able to watch that on the news, because it would come on at 6 o'clock and then it was gone forever. There was no taping, so you saw it or you didn't. And I know that I missed it. Um, but I did see it when they were doing it, because they would do some of the news stuff. They always tape ahead of time.
The names you mentioned, I think it was Cindy Etling, so Cindy and Peggy Etling. Does
Cindy
that
and Peggy
Yeah,
Etling.
that sounds right. And then Greg Ampigumian was the first captain of the UFP. The first 2 years, 75 to 77, was an executive committee that ran the meetings, and then they
Yes.
established the positions president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. And then Greg was the first UFP president, I think, starting in 77. But that's interesting that he worked at a television studio and had the opportunity to use one of our fanzines and its material to help promote a local convention.
Yeah, yeah, that news station, I think pretty sure it was Channel 3, and they promoted a lot. Um, and we knew a lot of the people on the news team eventually, because we'd hang out there when Greg was working, and we got a lot of really positive press. Because when one station picks it up, then the other stations are like, how come we don't have that Star Trek stuff? What's going on at the convention? And then we started seeing the news coming to the conventions, which I don't think in the beginning that they really did. In the beginning, we were very like looked at with skepticism, as though we were from another planet.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to, just recently to reread Joan Winston's book, The Making of Star Trek Conventions, which were about those first few conventions in New York City in the early 70s. And I was surprised that they actually had something called a press room. And so they invited the local news stations to come down, and then whatever Star Trek actors or Gene and Major Roddenberry or Isaac Asimov, whoever came to those conventions, would actually have a time with the press to talk about it. And so that at least at some of those conventions, they did actually get some press out of it.
I do
Yeah,
remember the press boxes, but at the cons, of course, it showed on the 6 o'clock news, and we were at the convention until 2 o'clock in the morning, so we never actually saw any of those press releases.
yeah, the infamous story about the first one is they expected 300 people and 3,000 showed up just by word of mouth in New York City, explaining about, everything that was going on then.
And I would say that I think the early cons in Phoenix probably had 2,000 people at them, and
Awesome.
mostly by word of mouth. But I know that it was way more people than we expected. And also some things that just a bunch of college and high school students, I mean, we clearly never thought ahead of time that the celebrities would be expecting a bar in the green room, or things like that we had no idea about. That I remember the con start days just being this massive amount of surprises, and now we'll do this, and now we'll do this, and now we'll do this, and we'll figure it out as we go. But we did get, I mean, William Shatner and DeForest Kelly, James Doohan, George Takei, they all came to those conventions at one time or another, and I can't think that they got paid very much. Um,
Yeah, I don't
once-
know about that aspect of it. One thing I do know is that to help support himself throughout the 1970s and early 80s, Gene Roddenberry would go on the college speaking tours and
oh,
would go and speak at universities. And I was too young at the time in the 1970s to ever become involved with that. But I often wonder if he ever came out here to the Phoenix area and spoke at ASU or someplace.
it would surprise me if he didn't. But so I graduated high school in 1979, and Joy and I both left that summer for Marine Corps boot camp. And after that, we weren't around very much. So we did not do college in Phoenix. And so we wouldn't have, but I bet some of the other early members might know, because that's definitely something that we would have paid attention to, is if Gene
Yeah.
Roddenberry came.
So if you left then you weren't around when Star Trek finally returned as on the big screen for Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which premiered on December 7th, 1979.
I was at Camp Lejeune. um, in North Carolina, but I did see it.
Yeah.
I'm like, I want to go to this Star Trek movie. And there were, I told some of my friends I was going to try to take a taxi, and Joy was like, no, 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 we're going to find somebody. She was at Camp Lejeune also, so we found someone, and they were like, what do you mean Star Trek? Isn't that a TV show? We're like, no, there's a movie. We're going to go see the movie, and you know,
Yeah, it's that it was just so heavily anticipated, and the fans worked for so long for 10 years between the cancellation of the original series and the premiere of that movie to
oh
encourage
yeah.
Paramount Pictures to bring Star Trek back in some form. It was just so heavily anticipated there. So,
And we were still writing letters. And I think that Bijo was still organizing letters campaigns. I know she did in the 60s to get that third season, but it was still going on because I have memories of being at meetings writing letters um, about getting some form of Star Trek back. Um,
she
and
also spearheaded a letter writing campaign to President Gerald Ford for the first space shuttle. It was going to be named the USS Constitution, but because of a letter writing campaign from Star Trek fans, it was renamed Enterprise. Now, unfortunately, that particular space shuttle was an atmospheric test vehicle. It never actually went into space, but they did manage to do that. So,
it
and
was
then of
still
course,
fun. What year was that?
that would have been, I believe, 1976, because I was a child
I
and I
have vague memories of that too.
yeah, I remember as a child in watching my Saturday morning cartoons, occasionally you would have the space shuttle brought up into the atmosphere on the back of a 747, and they would release it just to do atmospheric tests to see how it would land like a glider, because that's the way the shuttle landed. So let me ask you, yeah, we have the iconic photo of you next to the our original series transporter console. Um, what do you remember about either when it was made, or I don't know if you were around when they shot the video. You might have been gone by then. The UFP home movie project,
I
or
wasn't there for the home movie project. Well, that picture was for a Scottsdale Library summer reading program. And it happened pretty last minute. And so that dress was Trisha Sullivan's, and Joy Milstead, her mom, helped Trish sew it. And so Trish was actually supposed to do that photo shoot, but she was grounded. And Joy was gone up to her cabin for the summer, so I did it. Um, and I even arrived there not sure what I was doing, except that I was doing something wearing the costume. And I got to tell you that I was about 3 or 4 inches taller than Trish. And so that skirt was way shorter on me. It was up there in Nichelle Nichols territory. I was like, okay, I'm wondering if it's going to be okay if my parents see this. But
excellent.
yeah, they were there, and they were making suggestions of what we should do, And of course, being that time, they were like, "We want you to look at the technical manual and act like you're confused." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, I'll do this, but I I'm not going to portray a dumb." And then I'm pretty sure it was Tony who said, "Let's have her go underneath and fix it," because we were, had a more positive view of women, and they did do the underneath pictures where in retrospect now I realized that they had an appeal of having a lot of leg in them rather than promoting women uh, fixing things, but for us that's what it was.
Yeah. Well, it's great to know that that transporter was actually used for a promotional photo for a summer reading program for kids.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, great. These are really great memories. Did you have one other memory or something that you'd care to share about your time in the club?
We had a lot of people wearing homemade costumes a lot. And as I said, we were sometimes meeting in odd places. For some period of time, we met like in an apartment's community room. And I remember being outside, and we'd have food. And I remember being outside with some of the other high schoolers wearing costumes and having people on the street drive up and stop and say, "Hey, is there something Star Trek going on? Are you guys filming?" And we'd be like, No, but we have a club. You want to come to the club? People would see us. It was a fairly busy area on the street. And it was right down the street from where the Rocky Horror Picture Show would show at midnight on Fridays and Saturdays. And so we would get those people driving by who had a lot of crossover with us. And I'm pretty sure that a couple of people from the Rocky Horror crowd um, heard about the UFP from us standing outside in those winter months because it can get really hot in those rooms. And they weren't too big. And we by that time we'd have 30 or 40 people at a meeting. So, we were taking up a lot of space. But
Awesome.
it was something we looked forward to every month. We would have gone every week if we could have.
Yeah, yeah. There was a time when we thought, well, maybe we'd have more people come if we only met once a month instead of twice a month. And that person said, well, we have this tradition of meeting twice a month, and we've been doing it consistently since 1975. Once we break that, we'll never get it back
Mhm.
again. So
And did
that's
that happen?
we still meet twice a month in some form. I mean, just yesterday, several members went for a hike out on South Mountain and then went to lunch afterwards. So
Nice.
we still do that. And even during the COVID-19 pandemic, we were meeting on Zoom if we couldn't meet in person. So, we found a way to make it work, and we have for 50 years now.
Every 2 months, twice a month. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Star Trek was just such a thing in the 70s and early 80s. It spawned this whole culture, and so the people who were involved were very, very heavily invested. And the way I look at it is, since the bulk of the members were high school students or college undergraduates there, and they didn't have families yet, they didn't have full-time jobs yet, there was probably more time to invest on that. Whereas as the decades have gone by, our active members who are participating in the club are now parents or grandparents, have kids, have jobs, and people have to pick and choose what UFP
Yes.
activities they come to these days.
It was quite a bit easier back then when we had, and those conventions would take hours of time ahead of time, and then hours of time at the convention, and then hours of time afterwards. So they were they were no small investments.
Well, it's interesting because when I first joined the UFP in I guess it was, and started attending meetings, which would have been in 1998, I noticed I started getting involved with the local literary and art focused conventions, nonprofit conventions, and many members, active members of the UFP at the time, were on the convention committee to help put on those shows, whether it was yeah, in all different types of roles, either running the masquerade or helping to run the programming, or the green room, the staff lounge, the con suite, the dealer room, all of those different components of it. And even putting on programming. I like to do Star Trek panels. What's the latest in the happening with
Yes.
whatever Star Trek thing is going on at the time. So
One of the things I missed most from those early cons was there was always a film room that was quiet and dark, and then sci-fi just ran 24 hours a day during the cons in those rooms. And that was so nice. And you never see that anymore because of um, copywriting, probably. But when I first started going back to cons in the early 2000s, I was like, where are the film rooms? I saw so many sci-fi movies that I had not seen just by hanging out in the con film room. Sometimes we would sleep in there too because you're so tired. You go in there the middle of the day to watch something and you end up sound asleep because we would work till 2 in the morning, and then you know we would go home at 2 in the morning because our parents would never let us stay. So I'd be the driver and we'd drive home at 2 in the morning and then get back there at 10 and start again. So
that sounds, quite a bit like the those local conventions that we had here in there. I know some of them had film rooms, but it was often dependent on staffing as well as the copyright issue of whether there was enough people to have it, or whether enough of the people who came to the convention actually wanted to go to a film room like that. I know.
yes, and we so being in theater, we knew how to do a carbon arc um film projector. And so most of those were on reel to reel, but Joy and I would go start would do the carbon arc ones of the actual films that they had, because it wasn't something everybody knew. So we would go do that. And I saw some of the movies that I saw in total were because I was doing the projectionist for that movie. I know I saw The Day the Earth Stood Still first when I was doing it, and I almost forget to change the reel because I was so interested in the movie.
Okay, well, we've gone for quite a while here. Thank you very much for sharing your memories here. I mean, these are just wonderful stories here, and maybe we can do it again sometime if there's more things that pop up. So
Great. Thank you so
appreciate
much
your
for
time.
having me.
Thank
Loved
you.
that time.